biases about who is worthy of learning and who is unworthy of learning. So I think it's a reflection of this caste system, if you will. Who should have access to quality education, who should not? Even that whole idea of teachers talk about removing the bad actors so that everybody else can learn.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, shouldn't those bad actors, quote unquote, also get an opportunity to have an education?
Yeah.
And anyone who's an educator knows once you push one student who's being disruptive out of the classroom, someone else will always come up and take their place. So you never completely have this fully compliant classroom. And also, these schools, and Pedro Noguera talks about this, are really about socialization. So who fits within these ideas?
Indoctrination.
Exactly. Who is deviating from that standard? This is why we see, particularly with young women, and I do want to flag Dr. Monique Morris has published a great book called Push Out about the criminalization of black girls in schools, and she includes stories, direct accounts of young women, which I think is extremely compelling. But anyone who falls out of ideas of proper feminine behavior, or if you're perceived as being loud or disruptive, you are targeted for push out. So again, it's a system of socialization. So ESEA was signed into law by President Johnson, who was also a former school teacher from West Texas, in 1965. It also established the Title I program, which funnels federal funds to districts serving high numbers of low-income students. This is really significant because these federal funds are supposed to be supplemental to equitable local funding. And even though we know education on the state and local level is funded by things like tax revenue, etc., believe it or not, that funding is supposed to be equal between your low-income school districts and your more affluent school districts. Regardless of how you're building that revenue, it actually is supposed to be equal. Title I funds are meant to be supplemental funds for programs to help address and mitigate the effects of concentrated poverty, whether that's support for transportation, additional professional development, or supports for educators, after-school programs. These funds are supposed to be additional to equitable local funding. What we see, however, is that there's such inequitable local funding. States and districts will often take Title I funds and use them to fill those funding inequities. So they're doing things like taking it to pay teacher salaries, but you're not actually, that's actually a violation. These are supposed to be supplemental programs. ESEA has actually been reauthorized several times successfully on a bipartisan basis. It was last enacted as a No Child Left Behind Act in 2002. That act expired in 2007. Funding for programs, federal education programs, has continued through annual federal appropriations, so the funding has continued, but no one in Congress could actually agree on how to reauthorize the law. There was so much partisanship and bickering that there was no agreement, so that's how we got all the way to 2015, when finally we come to the reauthorization of the Every Student Succeeds Act, which, by the way, was a huge battle. And Dignity in Schools was actually engaged throughout the course of this battle, from the very, I know Liz can tell you, from the very earliest days, and actually the previous proposals and iterations that just didn't pass. 2011, lots of iterations that just did not make it through. It was partisan on the House side, the House of Representatives, and actually bipartisan on the Senate side. It was signed into law on December 10th by President Obama, who honestly was so ready to just sign a reauthorization bill into law. It replaces No Child Left Behind. This is important. So anything you know of about No Child Left Behind, adequate yearly progress, highly qualified teachers, this emphasis on testing, that's gone. That's gone. The waivers that 41 states in the District of Columbia have been receiving from No Child Left Behind, because it was so bad, that in 2011, President Obama started granting waivers to states from the sanctions of the law. Those expire on August 1st. Those are gone. This year, 2016, those are gone. So we see the 2016, 2017 year is kind of a transition year, right? States are required to set challenging academic standards and begin identifying low-performing schools or schools in need of improvement in the 2017-2018 school year. So this is like coming up very quickly, right? States are tasked with drafting, which we'll talk about for the bulk of our conversation, state plans where they have to outline accountability indicators and describe how they will measure school quality and student success. So that's key. We're moving fast. I want to give a quick timeline. We had public hearings that we had a lot of DSE folks speak at, including Gina in the back, Candace, several other DSE members spoke at these public hearings, both here in LA and in Washington, D.C. And you can view that online. We have on the Dignity in Schools website where you can view that public testimony. We talked about priorities for implementing the law, and we talked about school discipline and climate as a priority. In March and April, I had the dubious honor of participating in negotiated rulemaking. Y'all, it was so stressful. It was basically you're sitting, you're talking with school administrators. There were some educators, there were parent representatives about how to implement, particularly for Title I of the law, the provisions. It was a lot of back and forth. And you wouldn't think that advocating for equity would be a controversial thing.
Yes, I would.
You would not think that, but it really was. To the point where on the last day, I was making a remark about equity and how equity is what we fought for in Brown versus Board of Education, and I could hear someone in the audience say, there she goes again. But you know what? I wouldn't have to do that if we were actually successful in getting some equity. And Candace, I'm actually going to call on you, because Candace came and made public remarks about the implementation. So if you can just comment for a second on what you talked about and what you think is important. Because when Candace came in with the red t-shirt, wait, let me just say, y'all, everybody in DC now is like, when they see these red t-shirts, they're like, oh my God, the Dignity in Schools people are here again. Oh my God. From the NAACP and a parent, to the point where I saw some of our more conservative people, I'm thinking of like Carrie, who were coming up to her parent afterwards, after she spoke, and they were like, oh my God, you were so amazing. Some of those people too, I feel like some of their remarks were a little more tempered after that day. But if you just want to make a comment, Candace, about that experience and just about what you think is a priority for this.
Well, when we arrived, we sat in to hear the negotiations, and it was like watching paint dry. It really was like watching paint dry. And I'm glad we arrived, because we had planned to come that morning. We came later, and I'm glad we did, because it was really legislation at its worst.
Technical. It was technical. Yeah.
And so we collaborated, when we found out Janelle was going to be up there, we collaborated with the Richmond NAACP, Chesterfield NAACP. These are areas, NAACPs around us, who really do NAACP work. Because you know, those are the ones we don't call the National Association of Corrupt People. But anyway, we brought all the educational chairs from the regions for the NAACP, and they spoke. We also brought a parent who is becoming a staunch advocate, who has fought for 3 years for her child to just get private placement, because he had been harassed and abused so much to the point where he was so stressed out he would get paralyzed and completely pass out in the school. And so we fought for 3 years. She ended up getting the private placement, and she came up and told her story. And when we were talking about how do we reach legislators? We put a face with the oppression.
That's right. Yeah.
That's how we reach the legislators. And I posted her speech online, her manifesto. That's what I call it, online. I posted all of us online so they can see it. But my purpose in coming was, one, to address the issue of parent advocates and the need to have parent advocates without confrontation in the school setting.
Yes.
Address the issue of schools aggressively pushing out children of color and children with special needs, and the State Department and the Federal Department ignoring it, turning a blind eye and a deaf ear. And I mean, we can give them audio recordings of school districts violating the law, and they're like, well, you know, we'll give them a training, technical training. No, we need to start taking licenses. We need to start filing criminal charges. We need to make it a deterrent. Then we talked about redefining parent engagement. Yes. Because parent engagement does not mean I come to every PTA meeting. That's right. So we were talking about, and I'm on the PTA board, and I don't come to every PTA, but my thing is that we have to understand how, I told the group that we have to understand how our parents, how to connect with our parents. I told them the education system is over 100 years old. Horace Mann, when he created public education, the purpose was indoctrination. It was not for people of color or any other economically disadvantaged individuals. And so we have to redefine parent engagement and be more open, and I encourage the U.S. Department of Education to start going directly to parents to get information.
Yes, yes. And it was amazing. People were still talking about it on the last day. So it's phenomenal. And also, we'll talk a little bit more. Everyone has in your folder, you have a chart on the school discipline reform, school climate and equity provisions that we're going to walk through. And we'll talk.
Let me say one more thing. The team that came up, we even had a school board member from Richmond City Schools that spoke. And she spoke about Title I funds and the misuse of Title I funds. I'm strongly encouraging everyone to start getting the billing from your school district. We just FOIA'd all the billing from our school district. We've been doing it for a long time, but what we're finding is that school districts are taking Title I funds and reallocating them to cover lawsuits and retaining attorneys, outside attorneys.
That's a violation.
Yes, and so that's what we're finding. And now we have Washington Post and several other organizations that are looking into it to see that they're taking these quote-unquote instructional monies and reallocating them to pay high-powered attorneys to come in and disarm the parents, when the high-powered attorneys who are advising the school districts, they're really the arsonists and the firemen. They start the fire by telling the district to do violations. Then, and I don't have anything against attorneys because I love them. But I want to show you the cycle. I want to show you the cycle of how they're taking the money. The attorneys, we have organizations like Reed Smith Law Firm, we have organizations that are national that actually take the money, or being paid $350, $400 an hour. They take the money and pay these law firms, and they reallocate. They're admitting, now school districts are admitting, they're taking money from instruction to place in accounts to fight lawsuits and retain attorneys. Okay, so they're admitting this. So now we're saying, okay, state and federal regulators, what are you guys going to do?
Yeah.
So we had a school board member that talked about that as well.
And the misuse of Title I funds goes back to the original enactment in 60. So it was enacted in 65. The Legal Defense Fund back then, with the Washington Research Council in 69, issued a report showing the misuse of Title I funds. Districts were taking, and again, these are funds that should be targeted towards programming to support districts serving high numbers of low-income students. They were taking the funds and redecorating the superintendent's office and training young black women to be domestic workers. So funding training programs to work as domestics. And so we issued that report in 1969. In 1970, the provision was included in the law called supplement, not supplant. which requires that these federal Title I funds be in addition to equitable local funding, so to ensure that these funds were not being misused. But of course, that's not what has been happening. So we did negotiate a rulemaking. We will be awaiting a proposed rule